Live from our studios in Kingstown, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines, it's your favorite Thursday night show, Up Late with Sehon Marshall. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the host of tonight's show, Sehon Marshall.
Good night, and welcome to. Okay, I'm kind of an echo. Welcome to tonight's edition of Up Late with Sehon Marshall. I'm your host, Sehon Marshall. It's always a pleasure to be with you every Thursday night in your home. Now, as always, I'm going to ask you to share the live, and like has been happening for the last couple of. I am not hearing myself. Mic is muted. Um, okay, right. So, like has happened over the last couple of programs, we are streaming only on YouTube. So I ask that you share the link, share it on your Facebook pages so that other individuals can be a part of this program. Tonight, as promised, I have a very special guest who's already in studio and waiting to join us. Today's discussion centers around what has happened in Venezuela and what continues to happen in Venezuela. One of the things that has been clear is that demonizing and propaganda works. So that over years of demonizing, the legitimate government of Venezuela has been made into a demon. And even Vincentians are repeating the often trumpeted talking points of the United States that Maduro's government is illegitimate, he's a dictator, and all of the things that have been happening in Venezuela. Now, many individuals here have actually bought into the idea that somehow what happened, the build-up that happened over the last years, months, weeks, somehow had to do with the best interests of the people of Venezuela. Do you remember the idea of the narco terrorism and the fact that the US killed over 100 people, executed people in fishing boats, claiming that they were trafficking drugs? Do you remember that for years we were told that President Maduro of Venezuela is the head of this very famous cartel, drug cartel in Venezuela, that collaborated with the ELN and the FARC of Colombia to ship drugs to the US? Do you remember for years you've been hearing how much the Venezuelan people are starving, can't get food, can't get medicine? What we haven't been hearing is the embargo, the fact that for years the US and some of its allies have committed some serious uh, wrongs against Venezuela in cutting off the life support through stopping of trade, blockades, and that made life in Venezuela very, very difficult. But unfortunately, you haven't heard that part. Now, this week, there was an interesting exchange on CNN between a senior White House official, Stephen Miller, and Jake Tapper. I want you to look at this and listen to it and tell me how much sense you can make of it. But it gives you a good idea into what is going on in the minds of the US authorities. Listen to this.
The United States is using its military to secure our interests unapologetically in our hemisphere. We're a superpower, and under President Trump, we are going to conduct ourselves as a superpower. It is absurd that we would allow a nation in our own backyard to become the supplier of resources to our adversaries, but not to us, to hoard weapons from our adversaries, to be able to be positioned as an asset against the United States rather than on behalf of the United States.
Sovereign countries shouldn't be able to do what they want to do.
The Monroe Doctrine and the Trump Doctrine is all about securing the national interests of America. For years, we sent our soldiers to die in deserts in the Middle East to try to build them parliaments, to try to build them democracies, to try to give them more oil, to try to give them more resources. The future of the free world, Jake, depends on America being able to assert ourselves and our interests without apology. This whole period that happened after World War II, where the West began apologizing and groveling and begging
I don't even
and
know,
engaging in these
honestly,
vast
what you're talking
reparation
about right
schemes.
now.
What I'm talking about, Jake, is the idea, and by the way, you do. I know you love doing that smarmy thing, Jake, and I was hoping to be better than that this time.
I asked you about if there should be an election.
Exactly.
I asked you if there would be an election in Venezuela. That's what I asked. I said, why was the president so quick to dismiss Machado? You answered that question. And then I said,
the objective, Jake, is security and stability for the people of Venezuela. With our help and leadership, that country will become more prosperous than it has ever been in its whole history. Venezuelans
but the
will
woman
be richer
running Venezuela
and
right
safer
now is
and
part
more
of the Maduro
secure
regime.
and better off. There will be conversations, Jake, about all of these guideposts along the way. The reason why I was giving you that speech, which I know you didn't want to hear, is because you're approaching this from the wrong frame. This neoliberal frame that the United States' job is to go around the world and demanding immediate elections to be held everywhere, immediately, all the time, right away. To create these vacuums.
That's not what I think, but you invaded the country. Went into the country and we seized the leader of Venezuela.
Damn straight we did.
And I'm saying,
we're not going to let.
So is the U.S. going to have new elections?
Jake, is that we're not going to let Tim Pot communist dictators send rapists into our country, send drugs into our country, send weapons into our country.
Okay.
And we're not going to let a country fall into the hands of our adversaries.
Many, many things came out there from Stephen Miller, senior White House official. But one of the things that was clear is that America is powerful. He seems to be asserting, without doubt, that might is right. The other thing I want to touch on before I bring my guest in is the fact that for years we heard that somehow there was this cartel de los Soles, well, I'm not even sure I'm getting the name right, and that President Maduro is the head of this cartel. Interestingly, there were two indictments over the weekend. The initial indictment, and I'm going to put this up on the screen now, the first indictment had this to say. Let's put this up on the screen for you. It said, that from at least in or about 1999 up to and including in or about 2020, Nicolas Maduro Moros and a bunch of other defendants participated in a corrupt and violent narco-terrorism conspiracy between the Venezuelan cartel de los Soles and the FARC of Colombia. It went on to say that from at least, in paragraph 3, from at least about 1999 up to and including 2020, that the cartel de los Soles, or the cartel of the Suns, was a Venezuelan drug trafficking organization comprised of high-ranking Venezuelan officials who abused the Venezuelan people and corrupted the legitimate institutions of Venezuela, including parts of the military, intelligence apparatus, legislature, and judiciary, to facilitate the importation of tons of cocaine into the United States. The name of the cartel de los Soles is a reference to the sun insignias affixed to the uniforms of high-ranking Venezuelan military officials who are members of the cartel. So for years, we were told that there were members and that President Maduro was the head of this cartel, and that this cartel was partnering with the FARC and so forth to bring drugs into Venezuela. All of this was setting, in my view, a pretext for what happened on Saturday. But interestingly, in an amended indictment, here's what was said. The amended indictment, paragraph 16, says, the profits of that illegal activity flow to corrupt rank-and-file civilian, military, and intelligence officials who operate in a patronage system run by those at the top, referred to as the Cartel de los Soles, or Cartel of the Suns. So now, and mind you, This only appears once in this paragraph. Once. It's a 28-page indictment, the second one, and this reference to the cartel appears once. In the first one, that was prepared immediately following the arrest, Carteles of Solis was referred to many, many times as this major cartel run by, according to them, drug kingpin Maduro, and that was the reason they were going to Venezuela for law enforcement. But as the days pass, we are hearing more, and we are hearing what it's truly about. Let me invite my guest to join me right now as we say goodnight to my special guest who is coming on Up Late with Sehon Marshall for the very first time. My guest tonight is radio commentator, lawyer, and a host of other things, former Speaker of the House of Assembly here in Simmons and Grenadines, Jomo Sanga Thomas. Jomo, good night, and thank you so much for joining me.
Good evening, Cian. I am delighted to be on your show. I hope my voice holds up because if you followed anything that I said in the last few days, it is evident that I have a viral attack that is arrested my vocal cords. But I am hoping that I will be able to do justice to what you're asking me to do.
Well, that viral situation seems to have been going around for a couple of weeks now. I had it a couple of weeks ago, so I hope that you are able to recover speedily and regain full strength. But Jomo, you've written and commented consistently on issues of neocolonialism and imperialism. What do you consider to be the heart, Jomo, of what we experience now in our region and well, in Venezuela, but in extension, our region?
Well, it is clear that the Caribbean has long been seen as an area for exploitation. It has long been seen as an area where foreign powers, initially the Spaniards, the Portuguese, the French, the English, came out in an effort to make money. And these islands were occupied for many, many years. In fact, a lot of people from the Caribbean may not know this, but the Caribbean to this day remain one of the largest and last outposts of colonial entities in the world. There are almost as many colonial states in the Caribbean as there are independent countries. The French, the Dutch, the Spanish all have colonial entities remaining. We have Martinique, we have Guadeloupe, we have French Cayenne, we have Montserrat, we have BVI, we have Turks and Caicos, the British. We have U.S. Virgin Island, Puerto Rico, colonial enclaves owned by the United States. So there are many areas in the Caribbean that remain colonial outposts. And some of these places are seen as the playground of colonial powers. And even after independence, beginning with Trinidad and Jamaica in 1962, and with the emergence of CARICOM in 1974, fundamentally what we have is neocolonial regimes that do the bidding fundamentally of foreign powers, be they mainly the Americans and the British, but certainly the Canadians and the European Union are all exerting an inordinate influence political and economic influence, military influence on the going ons in the Caribbean. So yes, we still have a very strong neo-colonial tie. Many of our people are still comfortable with those ties, and we have a lot of consciousness raising to do if we are to get our people to a place where they would assert their independence. And in cases where we have gotten formal independence, where we would do the final act of full, complete emancipation. So that's where we are. Unfortunate, but that's the current reality.
Now, last week, in a military operation, the US, and this is widely known now, went in and captured Maduro.
They
I
captured or
know,
they kidnapped him.
kidnapped, captured, and I've used both words previously. So he was taken, and somehow this is seen as okay. But you and I know that this is against all international norms and international law. On Facebook, Jomo, you wrote immediately following the kidnap, and I'm going to put this up on the screen. You wrote, we're waiting for it to get full screen there. The illegal American military assault on Venezuela and the siege of President Maduro must be condemned by all those interested in international legal norms, particularly the right to independence, sovereignty, and non interference in the affairs of our nation. Anything short of full condemnation, you went on to say, is cowardice in the face of coercion and complicity with imperial aggression. Could you explain that fully, Joe, for someone who may not have understood all of those nice words that you use?
Sure. The first thing that we need to know, if President Maduro was the worst dictator in the world, or minimally, even if he was a dictator, which he is not, and if President Maduro were oppressing and exploiting his people, which he is not, the American military aggression against Venezuela violates all international norms. The international law specifically calls for the non-interference in the internal affairs of other states. The United Nations Charter calls for the peaceful settlement of all disputes. The law of civilized nations demand respect for independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity of all states. Excuse me. So, what the US did is illegal and unlawful and amounts to an affront to all international norms. And this is why I take exception to the notion of captured or taking, because to capture someone is to connote that this person was a criminal and that you had legal authority to go and take them. There's no such legal authority regarding and relating what the US did. So clearly, what we had was a kidnapping. Please excuse my coughing. I am really under stress.
That's fine.
So that's how I would respond to your question.
You take exception, Jomo, in your response, and I'd get to your statement a little bit more just now. But you take exception to two things. One, you said that he's referred to as a dictator, which he's not. You disagree with that characterization. You said even if he was exploiting his people, which he's not, you take exception to that as well. And I'll ask you elaborate further on whether or not you believe that the elections in Venezuela over the years have been free and fair. Could you explain to those who are viewing the basis for your disagreement with that oft-trumpeted notion of Maduro being a dictator who's oppressing Venezuelans and who's illegitimate?
Right. In Sehon, the Bolivarian Revolution began with the electoral victory of President Hugo Chavez in 1998. The Americans had always been opposed to the Chavistas and the Bolivarian Alternative Project. President Chavez talked about building a 21st century socialism. The Americans did not like that because Venezuela has had discovered and exploited oil for the last 100 years or so. But for the last 27, the Venezuelans have used these massive oil resources not only to assist the Venezuelan people, but to assist people across the Caribbean in Petrocarib. The Venezuelans used the money to build homes, to ensure that the people are educated. I remember being in Venezuela and talking to elderly people who were ecstatic over the fact that they had had a chance to see a dentist for the first time, all free. Much in the same way like happened during the Grenada Revolution. Because the Americans and the local reactionary elite in Venezuela were opposed to that, they tried to overthrow an elected president, Hugo Chavez, in 2002. Based on the tremendous outpouring of popular support, the plotters had to release him. And then he came back. The Venezuelans had more elections than any other country, referenda elections than any other country in the Western Hemisphere. It is instructive that former President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, who headed the Carter Center, observed Venezuelan elections and disclosed that he had gone and observed elections all over the world. And Venezuelan electoral process was beyond reproach. It was the fairest, most democratic election he had participated in. Oh, that was Jimmy Carter. President Carter was forced to walk back some of that statement because of the pressures, but he said it. And Carter is an intelligent man, lots of experience. He knew what he was talking about. So there was that process of delegitimization of the Venezuelan democratic process. But remember, in 2017, there were legislative elections in Venezuela,
Yes.
and the opposition won about 80% of the legislative seats. And that was heralded as a major democratic opening. So it appears that the only time the local opposition or the American and European elite recognizes elections in progressive countries is when their side win. So in 2018, President Maduro ran, and even before the elections, they said they were unfree and unfair. In 2024, before the elections, they said they were unfree and unfair. There's not a shred of evidence that the elections were unfree, but there's a massive communications machine headed by major corporations that are owned by very rich people across the country that would smear you so badly that the outstanding American revolutionary with Grenadian roots, Malcolm X, once said, if you're not careful, the newspapers, the mass media would cause you to love your enemies and hate your friends. People may remember that in 2024, in the run-up to the elections, Maria Corina Machado did not run. And the reason why she did not run is because the Supreme Court of Venezuela found her ineligible to run. Why? Because she had been actively calling for military intervention in Venezuela. Now, because she did not run and she was on the campaign trail in 2024, many people said, oh, Maria Corona is wildly popular. In fact, I saw a Sky News report that said that. But lo and behold, last Saturday morning, when Trump military, mighty, powerful military, most powerful in the world, swooped in and snatched President Maduro, Trump admitted that Maria Corona Machado could not be installed as the leader of Venezuela.
Absolutely.
Why? Because she did not have the internal or external support to do so. In fact, Maria Corona Machado, in a recent poll, won favor with only 9% of the Venezuelan population. In other words, she's less popular than Juan Guaido, whom the Americans hoist on the nation and the world in 2019 when they wanted to make him president of Venezuela, even though he had not contested an election. So that's the history. You hear them talking now about, oh, the people are going to get money. Oh, the money will be spent on people. Americans will make money. They want to go back to the status quo ante that existed before 1998, where the resources of Venezuela was used to line the pockets of the very rich local and foreign elite. What the Bolivarian Revolution did was to change that and to begin to spend the money in the interest of the people. So what the Americans and their friends did was to do as to implement a policy which was perfected first by Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon, former President Richard Nixon. It was perfected in 1973 in Chile, where for years they said they would make the economy scream. So you have an elected politician, you darken them, you smear them, you say they're the worst. You make the economy scream. The very people they are trying to help began to say, look, I can't take the pressure anymore. We saw it in Jamaica, we saw it in Grenada, I've seen it in Nicaragua, see it in Iran, and so on and so forth. So that's, I'm sorry I went on so long, but I thought that history was necessary.
And I'm sure our listeners appreciated that history as well from you, Jomo. Now, you mentioned the way that the monies from the resources of the people, the Commonwealth, were used to assist and lift the people of Venezuela, and also of CARICOM through Petrocaribe. It then brings me to the question, Jomo, how do you assess CARICOM's response to what is happening? I listened to Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, listing the fact that countries like Trinidad, Guyana, Jamaica openly cooperated with them, with the U.S. regarding their actions, not necessarily specific to what happened on Saturday, but throughout regarding Venezuela. And I listened to I read on this program the statement from CARICOM as put out by the Bureau. How do you explain that response from CARICOM? What do you think of that response from CARICOM to such egregious actions by the US to someone, a country that's so close to us and has been so helpful to us?
See, it is evident that these countries are so afraid. As Michael Manley used to say, we have to stand on our feet and not our knees. Stand on our feet and not our knees. This American administration is headed by a gangster. It is peopled by pirates and bandits. They, as you correctly said, killed about 122 Trinidadians, Colombians, and Venezuelans. Extrajudicial killing. The Americans became the judge, the jury, the executioner. And as we are seeing now, they are putting maximum pressure on Caribbean countries. We see it with Antigua, we see it with Dominica. Yesterday, we saw it with Grenada. Imagine, little Grenada that had 10 homicides last year. 10. We had 40. Grenada has historically had 10 or under 10 over the last 20 years. And that bunch in Washington issued a travel advisory on Grenada, warning their people from going there because they claim it's unsafe. The Dominican leader, Scarrett, had said he's prepared to use his good offices to negotiate between Venezuela and the US. Prime Minister of Antigua, Gaston Brown, had said, remember, they didn't ask us, but if they ask us to place military assets, we would say no. So it's payback time for resistance. They asked the Grenadians said, look, we're going to think about it. And apparently they never got back to the Americans. The Americans, well, they got Kamala Prasad Bissessar. But in all of this, we have to ask ourselves, Ian, where is Michael Manley of Jamaica, Errol Barrow of Barbados, Eric Williams of Trinidad, and Forbes Burnham of Guyana when we need them most? Because remember, very early in 1971, 1972, the four independent countries of CARICOM, not CARICOM then because CARICOM came in 74, the four independent countries, Guyana, Barbados, Trinidad, and, and
Jamaica.
Jamaica, unilaterally decided that they were going to recognize the Socialist Republic of Cuba and fundamentally broke the American blockade against Cuba. We don't have that kind of sturdiness anymore. Everything is transactional. You know, there's this anticipation that they would get something. But we have been here before. Remember in 1983, when Eddie Siaga of Jamaica, Tom Adams of Barbados, and Eugenia Charles of Grenada conspired with the Americans to give legal cover to the American invasion of Grenada. Siaga had told the Jamaican people that that Jamaica, Kingstown, would be the paradise of the Caribbean because of the American commitment. What came of that? Jamaica is still poverty-stricken with all of the difficulties with violence and so many other things. So that is the difficulty that we have. That's the difficulty we have.
Now,
So they don't have the backbone to say anything. In that regard, I must tell you that I was also because I remember commenting when the our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Trade, Foreign Investment, put out a statement about, oh, we are adhering to the CARICOM position, which is really diplomatic speak for saying nothing. They said we adhere to international law and the UN Human Rights Charter. But if you read that statement closely, it never said anything about calling on the aggressor to cease its aggression and to abide by international law and the United Nations Charter.
well, I was going to ask you
When,
about that, whether or not you believe that statement was laced with cowardice, as you said in your Facebook post,
it
because,
was,
like you said, Jomo. First of all, they quoted, not adhered to, because CARICOM does not have the sovereignty to cause us to adhere to anything. So what the minister did, he quoted from the statement, but then I was waiting for Saint Vincent and the Grenadines' position, and clearly we had none.
yeah, we have, we didn't really articulate a position. We went under the cloak of CARICOM,
Which itself didn't have a position.
which did not have a position. I saw a statement from the Bahamians in which the Bahamian says that we call on the parties, both parties. It's a bullshit statement, but still, it was much better than ours and CARICOM. They say we call on both parties to adhere to international law and the United Nations Charter. We identified international law and the UN Charter, but we didn't call on anybody to adhere to them,
Not,
which is
nor did we speak to the violation of it, which was clear based on the most cursory reading of the charter. Because Jomo, here's the thing: as someone who practiced multilateral diplomacy, served at the UN, I am familiar with how CARICOM works because of the fracturing of CARICOM and the different positions and so forth of the countries, it is difficult to get a strong statement out of CARICOM. So what I have been used to previously was that whether it's on Taiwan, on Venezuela, on Cuba, Nicaragua, there'd be a CARICOM position. But St. Vincent and the Grenadines has usually come out with its own position that is much stronger and much more direct than the CARICOM's position. In the most recent situation, what I heard was a quotation of a paragraph of the CARICOM's position, but St. Vincent itself not articulating its own position. And so I'm not sure where we are. There was no condemnation, like you said, of the actions based on the UN article. There was no expression of concern. There was no suggestion of or calling on the parties to refrain. I mean, what I heard used more than once in the statement was that we were assessing and we were monitoring. I'm not sure
yes.
exactly what you were assessing and monitoring.
You just had the kidnapping of a country's leader, and you're assessing and monitoring. But I gotta tell you that I was equally disappointed. Well, not disappointed because I didn't expect anything else with the statement of our opposition leader because he simply endorsed the CARICOM statement. He said, "Well, CARICOM, I don't want to depart from it." What I found utterly surprising is where he said he he didn't want to get into the narrative of whether the Americans' move was for oil or regime change, and where he also described the kidnapping of President Maduro as a taking. But he don't want to. Some people may be expecting him to be more strident, but that's the position for civil society organization and not a responsible political party. I what's that?
Well, we differ on that because I found that at least I got a much more definitive position from the leader of the opposition with regards to what is happening, and it was more to what I expected. But again, he is the leader of the opposition, and that is not the position of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We can't expect the opposition to articulate St. Vincent's position.
I am not asking
Okay.
what I'm asking for though is leadership where there's none. So you can lead, you can raise the consciousness of your members, your supporters, and indeed the population, even when you are wherever you are. So
But
when
I
you
got
have
that. But in all fairness, Jimo, I got a more detailed, a much clearer explanation of what is going on,
what,
and
what we
and
got, what we
and there
got was
was and there was a more definitive position coming from the opposition
what we
compared
got,
to the no position that
what we
came from the
got.
country.
Well, we had a 3 hour seminar which touched and concerned different issues of international law. We didn't have a condemnation of the American aggression. We didn't have a correct calling of what happened with President Maduro. What we had was a leader who has vast experience, having led our country for a long time, waffling. Says, I don't want to call it regime change or say it is about oil. In the same day, well, actually, 3 days after Trump said, excuse me, we are going to take the oil. And when Trump said, I am controlling this country now, and you say you don't want to talk about what is a narrative about regime change or oil. But I mean, we need not be detained by that.
And that's fine. So we now have this situation that is engulfing the region, Where do you think it's going next, Jomo? And what lessons are there for us to learn? I mean, I was absolutely surprised when I heard Kamala Prasad Bissessar telling our citizens to hush them out and be quiet and behave themselves because of the expectation, like the Georgians against Russia, that somehow, if anything happens, the US is going to come flying in to save them. And I'm glad you raised the issue of Jamaica, where they were expected to be the paradise of the region. What can we expect going forward for our region, especially having sat back and not, as countries, unified and call out this aggression for what it was?
Well, I think Kamala, with all of her backwardness, said out loud what the other leaders are saying quietly. All they shut all them out, all they want visa. Look what our countries have come to. And part of the thing is that a lot of Vincentians, Grenadians, Trinidadians, people across the region would be very upset with these governments if they upset that visa apple cart. Because people want to go America for shop. People want to go Costco's. People want to go be Best Buys. So we have become so materialist that we would give up principles, we'll give up independence, we'll give up sovereignty, so as to be able to shop in the United States. And again, that is one of the sad thing when you have leaders who don't do what they need to do to educate their population, their members, their supporters, the citizenry. So when complicated matters like these arise, people can hold their own. I think it is because of the political education in Venezuela by the Chavistas why after the kidnapping of President Maduro, you don't have mass uprising against the government. It is for a similar reason, the political education of the people, why Cuba has been able to resist for 66 years. You have to educate your people as to who the enemy are and what are the difficulties they would face. If you don't do that, you're going to run into problems because without education, people are going to go for the carrot at all the time.
Well, Jomo, I've had you for quite a while. I know your voice has been really, really inhibiting, but I really appreciate the perspectives that you brought to tonight's program. So I'm going to let you go, but I could tell you, I mean, I see you sipping from a cup there. You could have one of these really good cups, right? I could have it dropped off to your office so that the next time you're sipping, you could sip in one of these nice up-late cups. And you could even take it on voices. That's all right. That's all right. You could take it on voices as well. All right, but Jomo, it's been really a pleasure
Well,
having you. Thank you so much for your input on this very important discussion. Any closing thoughts?
well, I think that we are in really a bad state. See, and I think that the US is exerting maximum pressure on Caribbean governments. Well, actually, look what they're doing with Denmark. They're saying, look,
Yes,
we
on
want
Greenland.
Greenland. Look what they're doing with Dominica and Antigua. They say, you people want to come up here? Let them show us, not let them show us, let them deposit $40,000 with us. If we don't give them the visa, we might give it back. But when we give them the visa, we holding it until they leave. That's gangster. That's that's gangster. But that's the world. What the US has done is upend all of the international norms, the rule-based order. I mean, they always had fissures. right? We saw it in Afghanistan, we saw it in Iraq, we saw it in Libya. But as Caitlin Johnstone says, the US sometimes they play good cop diplomacy when they want to advance their soft power. And here with Trump, with possibly at age 79, no chance for another term, he's the bad cop president. Look, President Petro, Gustavo Petro, says, I oppose the genocide in Gaza. I have looked through our archives, our judicial archives. I see nothing there implicating President Maduro and his wife. Trump says, watch. I know you're selling cocaine up here, watch your ass, or I'll come for you next. That's the kind of gangster that we have heading.
You mentioned something, Jomo, and I had it lined up, but I realized that the time had gone. But as you mentioned, I'm going to have to bring it in because here you have the U.S. Now, as far as I'm aware, there is an organ of the United Nations called the International Criminal Court, and so the International Criminal Court can indict leaders and bring them for charges. That did not happen in the case of Maduro. This is something that is unilateral by the U.S. However, the same ICC has issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and others for the genocide and war crimes in Israel. But they're being fully protected by the US. So here you have
and
the US,
Europe. Don't forget Europe.
Yes. So here you have the US violating international law and norms to kidnap a leader while protecting someone who has actually committed crimes and they are
not only that, Sehon, not only that. The justices of the International Criminal Court have been sanctioned by the Trump regime for finding that Israel has been committing crimes against humanity. Francisca Albanese,
yes,
the special rapporteur on Palestine, has been sanctioned by the US regime for finding that Israel is committing. They're turning things on its head. They just removed America from 67 international organizations and institutions.
yes.
This is a rogue government. The former Prime Minister of Jamaica, I think it's Mark Golden.
Bruce Golden.
Bruce Golden, thank you. Wrote a brilliant piece. I don't know if you had a chance to see it. You should go and look for it.
I haven't seen it, but I was listening to him speak to, I think it's a gentleman Hughes on radio about it as well.
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. That's, when you talk about manning up, I mean, Bruce at 79, he can speak with a little bit more liberty. He's not the prime minister. He does not have that to deal with. But we still need these voices to speak and to speak forcefully. And I hope the Caribbean would get back to that place.
All right, Jomo. It was really a pleasure having you on Uplift with Sehon Marshall for the first time. Let me thank you so much for your perspectives, and I wish you all the best and get well soon.
Yeah, man, I will. Thanks.
All right, take care. Have a good one. That was Jomo Thomas, attorney at law, social commentator, former speaker of the House of Assembly here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, joining us on Uplift with Sehon Marshall. Listen, there's so much more to be said about what is happening in Venezuela and the way the U.S. is handling this. And for more perspective, I want you to listen to these comments from Stephen Miller, and it gives you a sense of what is really happening. There are many individuals who are naive, thinking that this is about the Venezuelan people and this is about restoring their lives and making them prosperous. And there are those of us who, when we talk about international law, believe that we're living in some fairy tale land, because there are countries like the US, as expressed by Stephen Miller, who really do not care about international law. Listen to his comments.
the United States of America is running Venezuela. By definition, that's true. We live in a world in which you can talk all you want about international niceties and everything else, but we live in a world, in the real world, Jake, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. We have the United States military stationed outside the country. We set the terms and conditions. We have a complete embargo on all of their oil and their ability to do commerce. So for them to do commerce, they need our permission. For them to be able to run an economy, they need our permission. The United States is using its military to secure our interests unapologetically in our hemisphere. We're a superpower, and under President Trump, we are going to conduct ourselves as a superpower. It is absurd that we would allow a nation in our own backyard to become the supplier of resources to our adversaries, but not to us.
The world is run on strength, on force, and on power, says Stephen Miller. But Article 2.4 says you're not supposed to use force or the threat of force. But Stephen Miller says, as a superpower, we are running the world based on our strength, the use of force, and our power. He says, if the Venezuelans want to do commerce, we have to give them permission. If they want to run the economy, we have to give them permission. And that is the power and the force and the strength that the US has used to cripple Venezuela for years since Hugo Chavez, all the way up. And people sit back and swallow the talking points that somehow it's dictators, the dictatorship of Venezuela that's oppressing its people. But Stephen Miller just said it out. Forget about international law. He referred to it as international niceties, he said. It's about power, it's about force, and it's about strength. He says, we are a superpower. He says, this is our hemisphere, and they, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dominica, Antigua, Venezuela, are in our backyard. And we sit and we hear these expressions and we ask ourselves, what are we going to do? Because I'll tell you this, the only strength we have is in unity. But the US and EU and Canada, they've been able to fracture whatever little unity we have in this region and cause us to not be able to come to a single decision. And that's why we're here. That's why they can pick off this or that state. Because we're not united. We're not united in purpose. As a region, although we are suffering the same challenges. The same challenges. Listen, I previously, under a ULP administration led by Ralph Gonsalves, could look forward to a strong statement as the position of St. Vincent and the Grenadines condemning the aggression. We condemned what is going on in Gaza with Israel and the US as St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I have no doubt that St. Vincent and the Grenadines' position would have been very loud, very clear in this regard. Now, some people seem to want Dr. Gonzalez to lead from the opposition. That's a very unique and phenomenal thing, isn't it? It's the same way where individuals who voted for Trump and not Kamala Harris wanted to know, oh, what are you doing with regards to X or Y? Why am I not hearing your voice? You can't hire somebody else for the work, but want somebody else do it. So yes, I appreciate the fact that you've accustomed to hear strong statements from Dr. Gonzalez as Prime Minister and hear the position of St. Vincent and the Grenadines from Dr. Gonzalez as Prime Minister. And you want to hear that now, but to expect the leadership while in opposition, as we give the leader a pass, That ain't how it work. That ain't how it work. We'll be talking more about Venezuela. We'll be talking more about the impact of what is happening in Venezuela on our region as we continue to look at the fracturing of positions in our region where 14 countries can't come to a single position that benefits their interests. It's unfortunate. Let me thank you so much for tuning in tonight to this edition of Uplift with Sehon Marshall. Let me thank Jimo Thomas for being a part of the program. Let me thank my director for holding down behind the camera. If you notice, for those of you who are talking about the camera going in and out, that's not happening, right? And the way the clips and so forth were being played, let me thank the director for doing all of that. And thank you, the audience, for tuning in. Until next time, God's willing, have yourself a good Thursday.